Prowl from G4 Geomatic Resources in Houston, and today we're going to do the fifth of 5 videos. This is just a summation of some basic troubleshooting tips when using base rover radio operations in the field. So what we'll do is go over a few tips that could be helpful to troubleshoot your equipment. We're going to assume that you watched the other videos, configured your radios, everything's up and running, and let's talk about a few things to look out for in the field. The first thing, when you're getting everything up and running, or if you're trying to interface stuff to get ready for a base rover setup, is firmware compatibility. So here, let's assume we have a CS20 and we want to interface that to a base station. If we're using a GS18 as a base, they now make a GS18 basic without tilt, or you can use a 18T with tilt. The firmware needs to match up. So version 6.5 is on the CS20, but there's some version of 6 on the GS18. If there's version 5, that'd be 5 and so forth. If not on the same level, there'd be firmware incompatibility. If you're using the CS20, it can hook up to the older Viva-based software, which is the GS10, GS14, GS15, or GS16 here. So basically, these versions, if they were on version 9 or some version of 10, the latest version is 10.6, version 6 will line up with that. So I put this matrix here because if version 5, that would line up with Viva version 9. So if you had 5.5 on your CS20, we'd have to have some version of Viva 9 on your base sensor for those two to communicate. If you had version 4 on the CS20, we have to have some version of 8 Viva firmware on your sensors up here. And version 3, we'd have to have version 7 on the Viva. I don't think version 2 was around when the GS18 came out, so you'd have to have, you can have a version 2 that interface to a GS18, but it would be leveled up with version 6 on Viva. So hopefully this makes sense. Just a quick chart. So it can be confusing. If you were using a CS15, once again, the CS15 will not hook up to a GS18 and will not hook up to the GS16. But the older CS15 can hook up to the 10, 14, or 15. And once again, if you're running version 9 or 10, we'd have to have version 9 on the CS15 and so forth and so on. It has to be on the same basic level with these to use the CS15. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Let's scroll down to the next screen. This sounds really obvious, but it happens quite a bit. If you're running a rover, make sure the rover has the antenna and in the right slot. And here we have a picture, the GS14 and 16 or 18 can run as a base station. In this case, we've got a picture of the GS14 as a 1-watt base radio. And it is possible to add the GAD 109 to the GS14 or the 16 if you're using a 1-watt internal radio. And then we could run the, like you see here, we have the adapter, which is 8 feet up, telescoping up on a pole, and it has the GAD 24 5 dB antenna. So if you're running the 1-watt, this setup is actually very handy. If you're trying to push for range, any height that you can get, the higher you get it, the more range you're going to get. So this is at the old Leica office. We had a client, we set up his GS14 as a newer model that had a transmit radio, and we were able to push over a mile with this setup with a 1-watt. Okay, so that's very handy. If you did have the little rubber ducky antenna, you'll see a little bit less range because the antenna is not high, as we have in this picture. If you run a GS18 as the base station, you can only use a GAT 28. Unfortunately, it's not a TNC connector, so we cannot add this external radio antenna mast. Okay, so we run a GS18 in the 1-watt mode, just have to add the GAT 28 antenna. We'll take a quick look first at the rover. So for GS18, we have to have the GAT 28 antenna. It's got to be in the right slot. So if you turn the 18 over, you'll see a little icon here at the radio emblem, and that's where the GAT 28 slots in, and that's the slot for the radio antenna. If the radio antenna is in the wrong slot, then you won't get past 100, 200 feet radio range. And once again, this is just a schematic of the GS18. And so you can see here, if the front panel's here, This slot here, A, is for the radio antenna. If you run a GS14 or GS16 as a rover, once again, we'd add a GAT 109 and the gain flex antenna. That'll go down, and that will allow this to pick up radio signals as been programmed. Sometimes examine these antennas. It's good to have spares. So once again, I would recommend if you have a base station, whether it's a 1 watt or 35 watt, have a spare 5 dB, have a spare antenna mount, and on the rover, have a spare GAT 28 and a spare GAT 109 and gain flex antenna. So if something gets damaged in the field, you can swap it out. Okay. All right. Let's take a look. Third section here, we're going to take the base radios. So in this schematic here, we have a GS14 or it could be a GS16 on a tri-brack. A lot of guys will set a 2-meter fixed height pole to eliminate measure up problems. And in this case, we'll then have the telescoping rod like we had in the previous diagram to get the radio mast up higher. And we're going to use a GEV274 cable. And here's the part number here. So I can hook up to GS14 base, GS15, GS10, GS16, or GS18. So this is a really handy cable to have. I have an SAE clip that'll hook up to your 12-volt battery and to your Satel base radio. Okay, so if you're running a Satel 35 watt EZPRO or 4Pro, a lot of times we'll program them and you can actually change the wattage to 25 watts because in the summertime in Houston it gets very hot, and that still gives you 90% the range as 35 watts. So in Houston we get around 3 to 5 mile range. Going out to West Texas you get a little bit more because there's less trees and obstructions. So when we take a look at the Satel EZPRO, once again there's a label there. What we can do is the device, this is in the previous video, but once again we'll re-emphasize the device is the GFU27, and I'll just show you how to program that later on in this video as well. It's really interesting when you click on here, you'll see the data type compatibility is Satel or Satellite 3AS, and that's equivalent to Satel 4SK on the Captivate rover CS20 side. The EZPRO is the current model. The 4Pro is out there, but with the chip shortage, this is the only one that we can get right now. And the Satellite 3S is really the mainstay data that's being exported. So this EZPRO cannot transmit the data compatibility of the Satel 16 FSK or 8 FSK. Okay, that's important. If you have the 4Pro, it can transmit the Satellite 3AS, and it can also transmit the Satel 16 FSK or Satel 8 FSK. And what that means is if you had like a GS18 or GS16 and a 4 Pro, you could use these 16 FSKs as they're more efficient when they're sending full GNSS data like GPS, L5, Galileo, and Beidou. Okay? But once again, with the chip shortage, these are not available. So if you're mixing and matching, you had some 18 rovers, because once again, you got to have as many rovers working off that base as possible. So if it's just strictly 18s and 16s, and you had a 4 Pro, you could use this data compatibility mode. If you had some 14s working in there, we'd have to downgrade it to the Satellite 3AS, which is the Satel 4SK, so all the rovers can interface and use it. Once again, the Satel 4 Pro, if you pick your device, like go to the radio tab, it'll be the HPR3. All right, so here's a tip. If we're using a base radio, whether it's the EZPRO or the 4 Pro, it's really, really important to check how much voltage you're getting from your battery. So the first thing is you want to have at least a 35 amp hour 12-volt battery. Make sure the battery's been charged. If you're running a deep cycle marine battery, the workable voltage might be like 0.3 to 0.5 volt lower than what we're spec'ing here. So basically when you turn it on the screen, you should see a voltage reading right on top of the screen. And it'll show the channel number. In this case, it's set to 430 and it's 35 watts. And the spacing here is 12.5 kilohertz. Okay, that'll show up on the main screen. Realistically, if you're running a 35 amp hour 12-volt battery and there's no load, you want to be seeing 12.9 volts, 13 volts here. If it starts dropping that might be your sign you need to get a new battery. And that's the most common problem that we have. So we'd recommend every 12 to 18 months, label up your battery, get a new battery every 12 to 18 months and swap it out. Some guys will put some lath underneath that 12-volt battery so the ground will not drain the power from the battery. Okay. Now if you put a load on and you start transmitting data and the thing starts dropping, you start seeing the 10, 11 range, you might just start seeing that your range suffers, and that's your first sign to swap out that 12-volt battery. So we've had a bunch of clients go, hey, it worked fine yesterday, and once again, when a battery goes dead, it goes dead very fast. So this is a very, very common and easy fix and cheap fix, okay? When you turn on the Satel and it's programmed up, on the screen here, you see the TD and the CD. So TD means transmit data, CD is check data. So these lights should be blinking every second. And in the middle, there's an RD. And that RD light should be blank. That means receive data. You can program this to be a repeater, and that way it'd be transmitting and the RD light would be receiving, retransmitting. But in the base mode, that RD light should be blank. And just, typically when you set it up, just take a quick look at those lights. And once again, if the RD light's blinking, it means someone could be stepping on you. And then we want to change the channel to get on a clean frequency. Okay, so that's just a little tip to see if someone's stepping on you. When we have the 12-volt battery, we'll have these Packrest SAE clips hooked up, and we'll have two of them. You need two of them. One's going to plug the power cable directly to the radio, and then the GEV274 cable will plug into the second SAE clip. So your 12-volt battery needs two of these. They have a fuse, so you want to make sure you have a spare fuse, and that way if that fuse blows, you can swap it out. Okay. Also take a look at these because sometimes they can get damaged and crimped, and if they do get older, it's good to have spares of these as well and just swap them out. So once again, if you're getting underneath 1,000 feet range, if these are not supplying proper power to the battery, just swap them out. So here's the part number and the price. Okay. There's a unique ID. This is an option. We can set a unique ID on the base station. This is used very rarely, but it can be very handy. If you're working in an area where there's a lot of people working with a lot of base rover units, like on a seismic crew, in a seismic job, we can tell the base station there's a unique ID, and it'll send this number over the radio signal. And then the rover's got to say, hey, if I see number 9, receive that data, so you don't pull someone else's data from another base station on the same frequency. Because you're on the same frequency, you can't pick up another base station. So real fast, I'll pull the simulator up. And what we'll do is, let me escape out. We'll take a quick look at where this is set. Okay. So what we'll do is, I'll switch to the rover mode. So I turn it on. Right now I have a work style for the radio. So I hit star, work style. We created a work style called radio rover. Okay. And what I did is I have a switch to base mode. So once again, if this isn't set up, you don't see that. You can go to settings, customization, app visibility, and then switch to base. If it's turned off, you don't see it. Just make sure it's turned on. And you can move that up or down and position that where you want to see it on the bottom. So right now it's, for our case here, it's on item number 2. And we'll hit that. If I go to settings, connections, other connections, we're now Bluetooth to our receiver, and then down here our RTK base number 1. I can hit edit, check this transmit, and I'll go to port 1. That'll be for the GS10, 14, 18, or 16. And we're going to transmit RTCM version 3 MSM. This is important. This means it's compacted data. Now my device, this is important, hit device. You won't see these 1 and 2. I've programmed them in. So if you're starting from scratch, the HPR3 is for the 4 Pro, and this is kind of confusing. The GFU27 would be for the EZPRO. So what I did, I just hit new and created a new name and called it 1.Satel EZPRO. and I won't store that, but that's what I did. So what I could then do is just scroll up and pick the EZPRO. And then I did the same thing. If you had a 4 Pro, I go to 4 Pro, I just hit new and emulated that because this has 115.2 baud rate and this one has a baud rate of 19.2. So that's how I renamed um, and my device to make it simpler. Okay. I just want to show you that sometimes it might default to this tab here. So just make sure you click on the radio tab, and then I've created these two new devices that just simplify the process. That's what that is. Okay. If I go to data rates and I'm now transmitting, so once again, if I had, a unique ID number 9, like we had in the previous screen, I've now set this to broadcast that over the Satel EZPRO. Okay. I can also change my channel here. So if you hit the control button, I can do it via the data collector. If it's a Satel EZPRO, once again, I can only pick the Satel 4SK, and forward error correction, I'll leave that off. But if that's on, it's got to be the same on the rover. Then you put your channel, hit OK, and it'll reprogram that. And that's how you can change your channel on the CS20 and on the base. So we hit OK. I can now switch to rover. So I'm using the same CS20 to hook up to my rover. So I'm in rover mode. I click on this icon, and let's say we're hooked up to the rover. I hit change channel. And once again, I got to make sure my radio protocol, once again, Satel 4SK because it's an EZPRO. If I was using the 4 Pro, I could pick these two 16 FSK or 8 FSK if I wanted to. Once again, the FEC is going to be off to match that. Now, once again, on the rover, hit settings, connections, or the connections. Go to GS connections, and we'll hit F3 edit on RTK rover. And in this case, we have the GS radio. The device will pick the Satel device that it defaults to. RTCM3 data is going to match up with the base station. And this is, if I was using a unique ID, this is where I come to the second tab, click on here, and I have to have the same number. If that did not match up, if I had the wrong number, then my error would not pump in, and that could be a problem. I can just uncheck that to take it out of the equation, but if I was getting stepped on, and there's a bunch of other crews out there, I can say, hey, just only pick up that unique ID to be number 9. So only use that in a case where there's a lot of people and you're getting stomped on, okay? All right, so let's move that down. So once again, we're going to check and change the radio channel. So I could actually do this on the actual Satel unit. On the Satel unit, once again, there's a button right here. If we program the survey software, it'll tell us the channel number is blank right now. The frequency, if I hit this twice, this button twice, I can then arrow up or down with these arrows and select channel 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's going to make sure that these frequencies are programmed into my rover as well. So that's how we can do it either via the CS20 or do it directly on the base radio. Okay. Once again, here our spacing is 12.5 kilohertz. That's a new FCC requirement. So that 12.5 kilohertz should be programmed in to the base radio, whether it's an EZPRO or 4 Pro, along with the call sign. Okay, so that's how you can change the channel on the actual Satel base station. It's not very intuitive, but it gets the job done. Okay. Once again, you can also check the data compatibility. So once again, if we're working with the GS14 or we have the EZPRO, we want to make sure that we hit this button once and we can arrow down and change it from Satel 3AS to 16 FSK if it's a 4 Pro and so forth and so on. Once again, let's take a quick look. If I had the Satel EZPRO and the Satel 3AS, whether it's a 14, 16, or 18, the radios inside all these rovers can do the Satel 4SK. So once again, if I came up here, I was in the rover mode, and we hit control. So once again, let me get back out here. The easiest way to do that would be to click up here, change channel, and that's how you can change it on the rover side. So that's gonna match up the Satel 4SK. It's gonna match up to the Satel 3AS for the EZPRO. And once again, the channel has to match up and the forward error correction has to be the same. If I want to change it, If I change the channel to the frequency would pop up, verify that's the same as the base, then the error should start pumping in. Okay? But that can be a little bit confusing. So the data compatibility on the EZPRO is Satel 3AS. Once again, it's 4SK like we saw in the simulator. Okay? And once again, we just went over the FEC setting to make sure that's consistent from the base into the rover. On the base, if I hit this button once, I can also arrow down and take a look at the FEC to make sure that's on or off and program that as well in the field. Okay, if that was a problem. If I was running the Satel 4 Pro, once again, it can transmit the Satel 3AS. So if I was working with GS14s, a combination of all three of these rovers, I'd be outputting Satel 3AS, and then all these would be using that data compatibility format. If I was doing strictly, a 4 Pro base and either 16 or 18 rovers, I could transmit the Satel 16 FSK. It's a little bit more efficient in getting all the GNSS data out. So once again, we click on here, change channel. If I change that, let's imagine this is a GS18 to 16 FSK, there's no FEC mode because all is turned on. Then hit OK. That data compatibility on the rover has to match up what's on the base station. Hit OK. And that's how you change the channel number and the data compatibility. So hopefully this makes sense, the difference in the EZPRO and the 4 Pro base radios. And once again, you'll see up here, there's a little box here that says Satel 4 Pro, and on the EZPRO, it says Satel EZPRO. That's how you know which radio you have. Okay. All right. So we went over, we hooked up to GS port number 1. We wanted to make sure we're using the RTCN version 3. The MSN compacts the data, so it makes it less of a workload on your base radio. Okay, so we went through that. And then we also went through the unique IDs and data compatibility. It's just a quick video that we went through on the other videos that we did in the series. I would just inspect, like we talked about, the battery, the cables. If this cable, protect this, make sure you order spares of these. I would just inspect the mobile whip. If this gets bent, and over the period of time it will, or these cables here get crimped. There's been a couple times these have been crimped here, and once again we get very, very short range. I would swap the cable, bracket, mount, and the antenna just to take that out of the equation. That could be a quick fix. Okay. So if you follow the above tips and the radio range is still bad, it could be local interference. If you're next to a fire station or police station, I would move the whole setup somewhere that's more remote. So typically if you're near fire stations, police stations, airports, or ship channel, this is where you're going to see radio interference. And the radios are programmed, if they see voice, they got to shut down. So if you tried another area that's more open, more rural, and you're still having problems, it might be a good idea if you have extra equipment to swap stuff out. So if one rover works, another rover doesn't, could be a bad radio modem in the sensor. You might have to send it into service. If none of it works, it could be we need to try a new base station radio. Something's wrong with that base station radio. Once again, first thing I do is get a new battery, swap out all the cables, and just start swapping stuff out for the basic stuff. Okay. All right. So hopefully that was beneficial. Please watch the other videos. They dig in deeper on how to set all the items up. So this is just a quick troubleshooting guide. Once again, it's myself, Jeff Ronald, John O'Rourke's technical support for G4GR and the Houston team. And Ronald is the service manager. Here's his information. So there was a problem with a sensor. We needed the radio repaired. We can reach out to Ronald and see him in the office. Okay. And there's also the Leica support team. There's the 800 number and the email for Leica support. So if you have any questions or have any survey needs, please feel free to reach out to us. Here's my phone number, email address. We're more than happy to help you out. Hope you found this beneficial, and please watch the other videos in the series. They could be very beneficial in setting up the gear that you have. Thanks again for watching.